Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of the Royal Blue podcast. I'm your host, Chris Beesley, joined by the Echo's Everton correspondent, Joe Thomas, and our regular guest and contributor, Gavin Buckland. I suppose we're 6 days on now from that Luton Town defeat. It's not feeling any better. But, Joe, you were down at Finch Farm yesterday for Sean Dyche's press conference previewing the Bournemouth game. I mean, how did you find the Blues boss?
How did I find Sean Dyche yesterday? Probably as resilient and as determined as he ever is to present a positive picture, which is obviously something that he's always going to try and do. It's an interesting one. I think there's an element at the moment I kind of think of, and I feel this when we go to these press conferences before games, after games, and to be honest, I feel in the match day reports that I write and everything that we say, where we're kind of trapped in a little bit of a circle at the moment, where the same things, the same narratives have been kind of weaved for the whole season so far, and really something's got to give, and that's got to be results. You can really do with a win against Bournemouth. That's not me saying that his position's necessarily under threat or anything like that, but I just think the whole club could really do with that lift going into the international break. I have a degree of sympathy for Sean Dyche with some of what he's saying at the moment. Underlying performances not being particularly bad, underlying stats trending in the right directions. I can understand why, if you're looking for positives, you can find things to be positive about in Everton's start to the season. But I think it's fanciful to look. You have to acknowledge the results of what matter at the end of the day, and Everton haven't got enough of them, and that needs to change, and the luck needs to change. And if hopefully it'll do so against Bournemouth, otherwise it's going to be a really difficult international break, and it's a difficult run of fixtures after then as well. And just hopefully this will be the day that Bournemouth will be the time that everything at Goodison Park aligns, and that you do have the good start and the chance creation that has been a genuine theme and a good theme of the home games, with the exception of Arsenal, that materialises into an early goal, an early lead that the squad can then build on and protect, and that's got to be the hope.
Yeah, I mean, Gavin, it's playing devil's advocate here. Is Dyche perhaps a victim of the games he's lost rather than necessarily the results? In that, I say that if Everton had lost at Brentford and then gone and beaten Luton, I mean, all would not be rosy in the garden. But the fact that they gone and won that game at Brentford, and obviously the Carabao Cup at Aston Villa, and then they've got a 4th straight home defeat. I mean, as much as it was hugely encouraging for the likes of Joe, myself, seeing those performances on the road, and all those fans that travelled to both those games, those home games, the vast majority of Evertonians are only seeing the games at Goodison Park, and they've lost all of them now.
But if you lose games, you're going to get scrutinised, aren't you? And if you lose home games like we have, was it 7 out of 8 or something ridiculous? You're going to get more criticism than if you've lost 7 out of 8 away from home, and you've won a few at home, aren't you? And I think you're right. Home form is, if it goes wrong, that's when you've got problems, because you can't carry on pulling things out away from home over the season. It's just not going to happen. You've got to start winning your home games, and this feels very much like a pivotal game, doesn't it, tomorrow? Yeah. If we win, we've won 3 out of 4. If we get beat, we've lost 2, going on the 2 home games, going into a difficult set of fixtures, and as Joe was saying, it's the international break. So I know you called this a while back, Joe, that you felt this was a big game, and I think on the basis of our defeat because of our defeat last Saturday, it's carry on. It's got even more significance than what I had, say, a month ago. So yeah, you are right. Just got to start winning at home, and that will relieve a little bit of the pressure. If you carry on this run, then Dyche, understandably, is going to get a lot of criticism off supporters, as he is doing at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, as Gab just said there, Joe, it's one that can go either way. It is incredible, like you were saying, that people are even pointing the finger now, given those previous 2 away results. And as Gav says, it could be 3 wins out of 4, actually. But then, if it's going into the international break on the back of 2 more home defeats. It really could swing one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that he's under as much threat as he potentially would be in normal circumstances. Yeah, I think any manager who's losing 5 home games in a row would understandably be under a degree of scrutiny. But there's so many external issues at Everton that are having an impact on what's going on. From whether or not they could afford to sack him, whether or not who actually makes the decision and what that decision-making process in the current state of things is. And also, in fairness to Dyche, he's had his hands tied behind his back. I know there are a lot of supporters that kind of are frustrated with the levels of the performance, the styles of the performance, and perhaps some of his rhetoric around games. But when you boil everything down to the basics, kept Everton up last season, and I think there were various points in the second half of last season where I think most of us thought that Everton were down. He does genuinely deserve credit for keeping Everton up last season, and he deserves for that to still be in the bank. The summer was a very difficult summer, and I think that because I speak to him a couple of times every week, and a lot of what I'm trying to do is analyze what's going on behind the words. Yeah. And I think the last international break changed a few things, really. I think that I feel like I've noticed a little bit of a kind of a change in him since then. The combination of the transfer deadline day when Iwobi was sold and he probably didn't want Iwobi to go. Not beating Sheffield United away the next day, then losing Damari Gray from a scenario where it very much looked like the club thought that they were going to be able to reintegrate him, and you thought that probably was factored into the decision to let Alex Iwobi and Neil Maupay go. And then you then had all the takeover stuff that then unfolded during that international break as well. I think for the first time, it felt like to me that there seemed to be almost a realization from Dyche that maybe he can't control everything at Finch Farm. He can't protect the players from everything, and that his job is going to be undermined at times, whether he likes it or not, by the wider situation at Everton. And I think that we have to give him some room to operate within that as well. People kind of coming to me and talking about obviously the home record, about his win ratio and things like that, and comparing him to former managers. But the circumstances and the context within which he's operating are wildly different to a lot of them and have to be taken into account. I do think that there have been some positives from the performances in the sense of they should have beat Fulham and Wolves. They did enough. They did enough in those games to suggest that it was on the players and not the manager. All he can do, you said this on Monday, all he can do is create a system that allows that team to create chances. And he's done that. And he did that with a side that was a threadbare squad that was also suffering a lot of injuries at the start of the season. And whilst that theme's continued, there have been efforts to improve it, because obviously Beto has come in, Dominic Calvert-Lewin's got back fit, Dwight McNeil's coming back fit, Jack Harrison is coming into fitness. So there are reasons to think that things could get better. This international break really does feel like an important one, because although you'll lose some of those players, well, none of those players I just mentioned, but some of his squad to international fixtures, it's almost going to be like a mini pre-season. It'll be the first time where, particularly that attacking unit, you'll be able to get that attacking unit working together over a sustained period of time where they're all fit, and hopefully come up with a cohesive plan to make it more effective for 90 minutes. Because I think that particularly at Goodison, they'd be and at Brentford as well, good in the first 15 minutes, and then it tails off, and that's when the problems start. But like Gav says there, the last international break, I called this Bournemouth game as being such a huge game. This is the litmus test for this Everton squad and where it is, because it's a game against a team that, in any circumstances, Everton wanting to stay in the Premier League or go any higher up the table, would really need to be beating Bournemouth at home. I certainly can't afford to lose it. It's a home game with a full squad that's as fit as it's ever going to be, against a team that might end up in a relegation battle, might end up in the lower half of the table most likely. And this is Dyche's opportunity to show us what he's got this Everton team to do. And it's frustrating because we saw what they could do at Brentford and saw what they could do at Villa. And it is, when it works, it's very, very impressive. And Dyche deserves credit for having that in the bank where it does work off with this group of players. But what he really needs to do now is he needs to make sure that Luton game was the blip for this Everton squad in its peak condition, and that it wasn't the Villa and the Brentford wins that were the blips in a negative trajectory. And it needs to start against Bournemouth. It's a massive game.
What Joe was talking about there, obviously, the players taking responsibilities as well, Gav. I mean, we've had 8 managers in 7 years now. And I mean, even Carlo Ancelotti, the great Carlo Ancelotti at times, shown up by this Everton squad. I know the squad evolves and the personnel aren't always the same. I mean, how much of this is that a manager can literally only do so much, in that I know all managers are defined by results, but if he's setting them up the right way and we can see those signs of encouragement, but the players just aren't doing it, is there a degree of sympathy there for the manager?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we can criticise the tactics against Arsenal and sort of the changes in the second half against Luton, which didn't work at all, and we ended up like a little bit of a mess, didn't we, in the second half tactically, and consequently we didn't really lay the glove on Luton. But you are right. I was told before we started. He's had a bit of stick yesterday, hasn't he, over this thing about the highest XG for 8 years and whatever, and games aren't won by XGs. But the underlying point I think he was saying is, I think it's sound, and it's an example of what you're talking about. I got my abacus out yesterday afternoon.
Okay.
And in fact, if you have a look at the, I don't want to bore everybody here, but just to make a general point is, if you have a look at our time under Martinez, Silva, Koeman, we tend to score 10% of our chances, in under those managers. This year, Dyche, we've had 108 shots on goal.
Yeah.
So if you talk me, would expect to score 10% of them, you're talking about we would have 11 goals so far this season.
Right. Okay.
We've got 6. If you added 5 goals onto our tally, we'd probably be looking at a different outlook, wouldn't we? And that's down to, as you're saying, poor finishing, players not being composed enough. And I think that's where I know sometimes you can resort to cliche and stuff, but that must be frustrating as a manager, mustn't it really? Is you've done a lot of the hard work, getting yourselves into good positions, but I've not converted all the chances that you should have done. And ultimately, he's the one who gets the blame. Yeah. And I think you can. What he was saying yesterday, we had a bit of stick, but some of that is on the players, isn't it? If Neil Maupay scores a couple that he should have done on the opening day, if we'd buried a couple of chances that we should have done against Wolves and possibly last Saturday, you'd be looking at a slightly different outlook, really. Yeah. The other thing, by the way, which I think is a really interesting point, is when you look at Dyche's career as Everton manager, and this goes back to the home form, is we're three times more likely to convert a chance away from home than at Goodison.
Yeah. So, what's that telling us then, do you think?
Yeah, we convert, since Dyche came, we've converted, I think, 4 or 5% of our chances at Goodison, but away from home, it's 13%.
So not just scoring more goals, but actually taking the chances more.
Taking more chances, yeah. 3 times, if you have a shot away from home, a chance 3 times more likely to score than at Goodison. So what does that tell you? And I know sometimes away from it's slightly misleading sometimes because teams set up differently, don't do any visit good when they're at home, and you're more likely to have more space and stuff. But that doesn't explain everything, does it? Does that say that actually there's a pressure on the players at home when they're in pressurised positions, which means they don't perform as well as when they're away from Goodison, in terms of being clinical. And I do think there's possibly something in that when people, there's been conversations this week about the home form, hasn't it, and the impact of the crowd and, the atmosphere of Goodison and stuff like this and the pressure on players. Well, that's an example, isn't it? Is they don't convert their chances at Goodison in anywhere near the same rate as what they do away from home.
Yeah.
I just thought that was quite an interesting little statistic that perhaps points to an underlying issue here about how the players are reacting under pressure at Goodison and when the pressure's off them a little bit away from home. I just thought it was just an interesting point.
Yeah.
But we'll go back to your point. It is right. Yeah. I think Dyche can feel a little bit let down on his players on occasions.
Yeah, I mean, that's deeply concerning in itself if you've got a hugely positive, vociferous home crowd encouraging you and you sort of, that's working as a negative rather than a positive. Joe, I mean, I just had your embargo bit with Sean Dyche overnight, and he talked about you can smell it on the players was the line that was taken out of that one. And he explained that one in terms of he was actually saying he didn't think that the previous results had much of a bearing on the Luton Town defeats.
Yeah, it was interesting. Just to carry on with what Gav was saying about XG there, you know, it's an interesting one because when Dyche came in and he started off quite saying that, you know, it's more about the feel and the noise and his eyes and what he thinks about games and stats, and now he's under a bit more pressure. Obviously, the stats offer him some encouragement. He kind of flipping the script on that. It's quite interesting. I think he's got a very good point on the XG, but I think there are two problems from Everton's perspective, and one of them is one of the reasons there's so much pressure on Everton to convert the chances that they are creating is because they're letting in silly goals at the back. And I think for all the chances that they missed against Luton, if they defended set pieces properly, don't concede those 2 goals, they still come away with a 1-0 win.
Yeah,
and you know, you could say similar for Arsenal. Although it was a bit of a complicated short corner routine and Arsenal were clearly the better side again, you know, Arsenal repeatedly caused issues from set pieces. And if Everton had solved the problem mid-game, which is another thing that they failed to do with the dangerous set pieces last week, then maybe they come away with a point. The other problem that I think, or the other thing that I think is important context for the XG, and I think this has to frame a whole discussion about the early part of the season so far, is we have to remember who these performances were against, and they were against Fulham, they're against Wolves, they're against Luton. You know, they're against sides that we fully expect to probably be in the bottom 6 or 7 at the table. And whilst it's one thing to say if the XG carries on trending in the same direction as it is, then sooner or later the luck will turn and the goals will come. That works on the basis that you carry on creating chances. And when you look after Bournemouth, at what Everton's home games are coming up, the next home games after that are Brighton, Manchester United. They go Brighton, they go Manchester United at Goodison Park. Then they go into December, they go Newcastle United, Chelsea, and Man City. Yeah, those are the next 5 home games. And all right, yeah, there are ways in which most of those sides, some of those sides have weaknesses. You know, we saw the Dyche side dismantle Brighton on the south coast earlier on this year. We know that Manchester United and Chelsea could potentially be got at, but there are also teams with squads of players and ways of playing that I think are far more advanced than where Everton currently are at the minute. And in fairness, where Dyche could get this Everton to, because of all the things that we've already spoken about that he doesn't control. So there is a bit of a danger, really, that if there's a reliance on eventually the luck turning, you know, it's going to be better performances at home to see that carry on creating those chances and against better defences, particularly obviously Newcastle and City. So yeah, this really was a kind of a period, the start of the season, where Everton needs to get points in the bank to protect them against the run of fixtures that come in this next phase of the season, and they haven't done that. I think we all did a piece. We'll probably reflect on it next week, where we looked at how many points we thought Everton should be aiming for from the first 8 games of the season, and I think everybody would have said that double figures was a minimum, and nobody would have been looking at double figures now and saying, oh, Everton at 9th, 10th, you know, it could be a great season and they could be finishing in the top half. They'd be saying, well, look, we've just added a little bit of a comfort blanket for some of the difficult times that are likely to come. So, you know, even if they beat Bournemouth, they still come away with only 7 points from this 8 games, and that is worrying, albeit, again, I do think the league is weaker this season and they'll need to do less to stay up, and that is some comfort. Obviously, if they do beat Bournemouth, they do open up a 4-point gap to Bournemouth. So there is a third side there, as well as Luton and Sheffield United, that there's a bit of a buffer to, which would be handy. In relation to the piece that you're talking to there, Chris, it's an interesting one because I spoke to Sean Dyche about this yesterday, and the way he disagreed with the way that I framed it. But when he did an interview with the club, he said this a couple of times when he came in the first few months of his time at Everton. He spoke of this it's kind of this culture within the dressing room where the wins were celebrated too positively and the defeats were taken too negatively. So essentially, you have this roller coaster of emotion that dictated by the immediate, the present, the what has happened on. It's almost like an inability to see the bigger picture and how everything fits into it. So I asked him about whether or not he thought that 8 months into his tenure he had much success at challenging it. I described it as an emotional turbulence, which was a phrase that he disagreed with.
Okay.
I'm not particularly sure why. I think that's a relatively fair summary of where we're at. But essentially, what he was saying is he looked at the past week and he thinks it is addressed because he looked at the win against Brentford and he didn't see a dramatic high. He saw a stability within the dressing room, which then gave him a platform to then go and put in the very, very good performance and the very useful win against Aston Villa. And then he was saying that he didn't think that emotions got the better of the players in the build-up to Luton, which was essentially what I was trying to get at. Did he think that perhaps the Luton performance was undermined by the success and the confidence perhaps being bred too highly, too dramatically, going the other way after those 2 wins? And he was saying he was actually quite pleased with the culture, the mood, the attitude within the dressing room going into the Luton game. And he still very much sees that as more a game in which the preparation was right, a game in which probably the selection was right. He still sees it as a dominant performance from Everton with a lot of positives, and effectively a game that was lost not for any wider circumstance, just through a failure to manage the details well, i.e. defend those 2 set pieces and convert the chances that were created. So it was an interesting point. Yeah. I'd like people to read the story and see if they get it. I don't know if I've made it a little bit kind of too I think I might have always tried to be a bit too clever with it, but there was a valid point I was trying to get, and I think he tries to answer it. How much kind of credence we put in his words is another one, because I didn't really see the Luton game as a dominant performance. All right, they had more possession, but it's not a game that I came out of thinking it was just 3 moments, 1 missed chance and 2 bad set pieces that cost them. I thought that Luton certainly didn't deserve to lose that game.
Yeah, I mean, based upon that, Gav, I mean, where do we go? On the one hand, we're saying that the players are nervous at Goodison Park and the expectation, and we're saying that they think they're Real Madrid after 1 victory, and then after the defeat they need picking up. I mean, that's a problem. Is we've got like both ends of the spectrum, haven't we? I mean, it's a long time for Everton. I'm probably saying this going back to Marco Silva, but the personnel's changed since then. So I mean, that's concerning. That a different set of players, and Dyche is still trying to flush that out of the club. He keeps talking about this 2-year story, doesn't he?
Yeah, does he? I can't remember mentioning that, to be honest with you. Yeah, it's an interesting emotional divergence, maybe. But no, it's interesting whether you celebrate more. Go back to me home and away stuff. When you win at home, Carl's Day, you celebrate a lot more than say if you win away from home. Does this point to maybe a lack of leadership and direction from the players within the dressing room, Joe? In terms of what you want in those circumstances is, senior pros to, if you have won and stuff. Imagine like a Roy Keane say, you've only beaten such and such. Calm down, calm down. That type of stuff. Do you think that within that, why is it on him? Why does he feel it's on him? Surely there's players there who senior pros who should be trying to do the same in terms of controlling the colleagues and how the teammates, maybe younger players, newer players to the club. Shouldn't it be up to them to keep everything on an even keel? Yeah. Shouldn't just be the management team, should it? And does this point to a lack of leadership and direction, as I say, within the dressing room that people have accused the squad of having, do you think, Joe?
I think quite possibly. I think it's an issue that Dyche has to deal with rather than one that he's created himself, like so many of the problems that he's inherited. And, we spoke about this on Monday, and again, I framed my match report around the 65th minute of Luton when Morris and Branthwaite were receiving treatment, and there was a stoppage in the game for a decent chunk of time, and it was 65 minutes in. It felt like an opportunity for either players or the management team to just get everyone together and say, look, okay, last 20 minutes hasn't worked out all right, but we've got another half an hour here really to try and get our way back into this game. And we've got the ability, with the quality. So how are we going to do it? And instead, really, apart from a handful of discussions, between players, the vast majority of them were stood around with their hands on their hip or in isolation, and they're not doing that. And those are the times in a match and in a season where really you need someone to be getting around the players and saying, look, let's bring some clarity to what we're trying to do here. And let's, always just reinforce some of the belief that they have within themselves, because there was ample time to get a second. And then I know when the second came, potentially a third at that point. And we didn't see any of that. We didn't see any improvement in the performance after it. Everton could have been playing for another half an hour and they probably wouldn't have scored, which is another thing going back to the XG. There's an interesting time, probably an interesting conversation about when the XG is created by this Everton side, because they come out the traps very, very quickly, but they don't seem to be able to react necessarily to in-game changes and flux, because I don't think anyone really, there weren't many gilt-edged opportunities in that second half, and Everton really needed to do something to score against a side that was trying to defend a lead. So I think there probably is it's less about a lack of leadership within that dressing room, and maybe it's the type of leadership within that dressing room. I think we can all imagine that Tarkowski is probably a good person and a good role model and inspiration within there. But you need to have people around you to reinforce that. And sometimes when I look at the performances at the moment, and when I look at some of the performances and how they can be a bit disjointed every now and then, I almost wonder if there are a few cliques within that dressing room, and there isn't a kind of a thread of big personalities that are all necessarily on the same wavelength that run throughout that squad. The way in which the defence seems a very separate entity to the centre midfield, and they kind of operate almost on two different wavelengths. And I think when Everton are at their most disjointed, that really shows. And I wonder if it's a case of, rather than a lack of, rather than saying they don't have leaders, they either don't have enough leaders, or the leaders aren't on the same wavelength, maybe. I don't know if that makes sense.
Can I just add another point to that, Chris? I mean, because I think it's a very interesting thing, this, isn't it? Yeah. I've spoken before, haven't I, about one of my main beefs about football squads where they go wrong is you have a lot of older players and a lot of younger players, and there's nothing in between. So that affects you in terms of, like, you've got very few players at their peak, and so consequently you have mismatches all over the pitch. And the way that also impacts on the squad is what you're saying there, Joe, is what people within the squad have got in common. So Ashley Young's football experience is completely different to, say, Nathan Patterson's or James Garner's, because there's 15, 16, 17 years between them. Yeah. Older players, okay, you might get some leaders. When they get a certain age, they're only interested in their own form, keeping themselves fit. And if you've then got a big age gap to younger players, you have less in common. And I think that's when, you're right, not only does that affect you on the pitch, but I think that's when you do get cliques in the dressing room, because you end up with like 2 or 3 different groups of players because of age and background who have not got a lot in common.
Yeah.
And
That's spot. Go on, Gav.
what do you think, Chris? Do you think that's...
I think you're spot on there, because if we look at Everton's most successful ever team, that there are all more or less at the peak of their powers, aren't they, in the mid-20s? And whereas the way that the finances are currently with the club, you've either got a load of veterans whose best days are behind them, or promising players who are very young, and you've got to take a chance on.
Yeah, and that affects you on the pitch, but it also affects you on the pitch, Joe. And maybe that sort of affects the sort of stuff that you're talking about there, about emotions, about the lack, maybe the wrong type of leadership, or maybe not the best type of leadership, probably the better phrase. And like where there's groups with there's groups within the dressing room. And I think that also contributes. And it's an interesting thing. The sensitive places are the dressing rooms. Very sensitive. And you just wonder whether some of that is affecting, our performances on the pitch and just the general atmosphere around the club.
Yeah. I mean, it does seem difficult, because, we're forever told that, and no reason to dispute it at all. I agree myself. What a model professional Seamus Coleman is, the man who Frank Lampard said was like the greatest man he'd ever met. And, we're always told that he is, whether he's playing or not, and he hasn't played for a while because of injury, he's still very much a vociferous, positive presence around the dressing room. James Tarkowski's been mentioned, what a leader of men he is, both in terms of his performances, leading by example, and the way he is as a big personality, a big man. Jordan Pickford's no shrinking violet, is he, in terms of offering instructions to his teammates? And even up at the other end of the pitch, Dominic Calvert-Lewin's sort of a positive, bubbly character, from the very articulate as well, from the times I've spoken to him. So it is a head scratcher in terms of, you've got around the pitch, you've got these big characters. I mean, even Amadou Onana, a young lad like him, such an extrovert and, positive, confident player personality. So yeah, it's concerning that we've got those, but like you said, is it a click? We don't know, because like the rest of the world, we're looking at it from the outside. But in terms of positives, Jarrad Branthwaite, Joe, he was another one the manager was asked about, and again, sort of keeping it on the level. He was mentioned about Branthwaite celebrating the tackle. He wasn't too enamoured with that, but he's talking about the positive trajectory that he's been on since he came into the side, and the possibility of a new contract being close. I mean, I think he chose his words carefully after what Frank Lampard said about Pickford, Iwobi and Gordon in December. Obviously, we've only Pickford putting pen to paper. But yeah, I mean, Branthwaite has been one of the positive stories from this very difficult start to the season for Everton.
Yeah, he really has been selected in the England under 21 side again. That's been announced this morning, and deserves it. I think he's been very good. He's come into the side and he's made that spot his own, really. And it's quite interested to piece on him last night, and obviously the feedback is really positive about him. And I think there was obviously that clamour around him at the beginning of the season to start, and retrospectively, we now know that he was carrying an injury around that time. And when I've asked Sean Dyche about this, he said he was thinking of starting Branthwaite at the start of the season, but that was one of the concerns around it. When he came back and had the injury from the international action with the Euros with England. It's an interesting one, because when you look at Everton's results, you look at the fact they failed to keep a clean sheet. It feels strange to be praising a defender. But I do think that he's been very good. He reads the game so well, and he has that composure, which is a reassuring presence at the back. There was a moment in the Aston Villa game where the move for the first goal against Aston Villa was started by Branthwaite. Villa were on the attack, and he read a ball, he read a pass, stepped up to intercept it, and then rather than just kind of panic, 30 yards from his own goal and not be sure what to do, he carried the ball 20 yards, had a look around with him, passed it through to Dan Juma, who ended up kind of, started the move off effectively, and there's just so much to be positive. He just looks really good, doesn't he? He looks strong, he looks determined, he looks fit. And like I say, he's got that composure as well, which is really good. And you feel like Tarkowski's probably a good person to have alongside him as well at this stage in in his career, albeit again, there's another, like we just alluded to, big age gap at different kind of areas of their career. And it's just a reminder, I think, that there are positives in this Everton squad that you can find if you're willing to look for them. It's just whether or not the wider circumstances will allow any of them to see the light of day. And I think that we can't get ahead of ourselves here, and think too far ahead into Everton's future. And if we want any real indication as to where the club is thinking on that front, well, they sold their most promising academy player, Tom Cannon, last day of the transfer window, and that's one that I still feel is a really kind of damning indictment as to where this club is right now, that it would do so. But there is a core group of players. You look at Branthwaite, you look at Garner, you look at Anana, and a few others around, the likes of Patterson and that, who could form the core of an Everton, of a competitive Premier League Everton squad for a good few years to come. And again, it comes back to just how important this season is, and not just Everton staying up, but if they do stay up, and I do believe they will stay up, the manner within which they stay up, because there's going to be so much change next summer. There are so many of the players on big wages go out of contract, and there's a big opportunity. Whilst on the one hand, Everton's sides will constrict quite dramatically unless they start handing out new contracts, which I'd be surprised with quite a few of the players. There's a real opportunity, probably Kevin Farwell's first opportunity, to genuinely have a go at shaping that side. And if Everton can get to a situation where they get to April, they get to Easter, and it looks like they're probably going to be safe, then there are almost two waves within which the free deals are done, or the cheap deals are done in the transfer window, either right at the very beginning of the summer or right at the very end. If Everton can get on the front foot and have some of those conversations with players that are coming out of contract at the end of this season, then they've got something that they can really build around, and perhaps kind of build a future around, a more stable and sustainable future around. And Branthwaite's a huge, huge part of that. But, like I did for the headline of this Branthwaite story last night, it's very much a case of Everton need to kind of save their future in order to save their present in order to build their future. And that's where we are at the minute. It's sad, and you want to have a wider perspective, but we are living game to game at the moment. And whilst Everton have the form that they do currently have, that's only going to continue.
Yeah. Gav, just before we move on Branthwaite, I suppose he's a ringing endorsement for when loans can work, because he's such a big lad, such a unit. You forget how young he is. He's only just turned 21. And he didn't look this accomplished before he went out on loan, but after he went to Blackburn Rovers, came back, got sent off infamously in that Brentford game, but seems to have really sort of matured after that season at PSV.
Yeah, absolutely. I said when he came back, that fact, isn't it, that a striker in the Premier League's a stone heavier on average than a striker in Holland, and whether did that change in terms of the type of play you're facing, and the physical presence would be a challenge for him. And I know the Luton lad gave him a rough time last week, but that's part of the learning process, isn't it? And you can see physically he's developed a lot, hasn't he, over the last 18 months. And I like him a lot. He reminds me, I remember saying this as soon as he played, and he played in lockdown. I think his gait, as you would say, is very much like a young Terry Butcher, and Terry was a great centre half. He reminds me a lot of him in terms of his build as well. So yeah, I've been really impressed, and he's good on the ball. I mean, he's got two good. I mean, people think he's left-footed. He's right-footed, isn't he, Branthwaite?
Yeah.
I think he got told off last year after one of the pods saying he was left-footed, and somebody tweeted me and said, "Oh no, he's right-footed." Yeah, I've been really impressed, and that paradox of he's saying, defensively we've not been as good as what we'd expect him, but he's been by and large excellent since he's come in, and there's room to develop there. But we all know, don't we? That's the underlying thing. When somebody of his promise signs a new contract, you're there to protect. It's there to protect his value as much as anything else, isn't it? And already the usual suspects have been linked, haven't they? And have been for some time. But yeah, I've been really impressed with him, but he's still very much on a learning curve. But if he carries on, he can have a really good career.
Okay. And I'm worried about that.
Just to jump in there, Gav. I think you've been unfairly. Done there because Branthwaite's left-footed. He says that himself. He said that in an interview with the club that was in the most recent program. He goes,
"Oh no, well, maybe he's just changed feet over the summer when he was just
this is Branthwaite. This is Branthwaite in his own words. I am left-footed.
Yeah,
I've got a 5-star weak foot on the new FIFA.
Wow.
So if I'm hitting a long pass, short passes with my right. So
this has gone down. This conversation has gone down an unexpected rabbit hole, hasn't it? I don't know. Anyway, he's good on both feet anyway, which is always an attribute for any footballer. But yeah, I'll get back. Yeah, I'll get back to that fella who told me off there.
Yeah. No, it is. He's been very much a 2-foot player, so it's good that you can actually have a debate about that as opposed to all those wholly 1-foot players. So I'm worried about time with this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask us to sort of sum up thoughts on what the Bournemouth game will be like with a prediction, sort of all in one fell swoop, if possible. So if I start with you, Joe, I mean, obviously it's not quite the stakes of 28th of May, but more or less about as big as you're going to get after that.
Yeah, I think it'll be more the same against Bournemouth. I think a theme against all from the home games and again from Brentford. Everton start fast, start positively, try get an early goal, and hopefully they do this time. And then they're a completely different. They're a completely different side when they got a lead to protect. I'm gonna hope that the luck breaks this time round. I do think in some ways this game might be a little bit easier for this Everton side in the sense that Bournemouth are a bit more possession based and will come on to Everton a little bit more. I think that they press higher on the side, and that then means that Everton can beat the press. That they'll have a little bit of space to counter, and that almost works well for Everton, or better than situations like last week where they got a lot of possession on the halfway line or on the edge of the opposition box, and they just can't quite figure out what to do with it. So maybe hopefully the luck changes. They broke the goal drought at Goodison last week. Hopefully they get the win drought this week, get a 2-0 win, and just send everybody into the international break. I'm not saying happy, but perhaps with the Wolves not at the door of the table looking a little bit better, and perhaps with something to build on going into a very important fortnight for this group of players, I think.
Take that 2-goal cushion. What are your thoughts, Gav?
Yeah. I'm similar to Joe. I think I'd like to see a little bit more of an attacking lineup without going into too much detail than what we saw against Luton for the start. It is a big game. We said before the Brentford matches, snap your hand off for 5 points from Brentford, Luton, and Bournemouth. If we went tomorrow, we got 6, so that will be, and plus a win at Aston Villa, so that'd be progress for me. Yeah, I'm gonna. It seems like a 2-0 home win tomorrow, but I did say 3-0 last week, didn't I? So I'm ratcheting it down. But yeah, 2-0, and hopefully it'll be 10% conversion rate of chances, reverting to the norm. But they conceded a lot of goals, haven't they, Bournemouth? This is 15 they conceded.
Wow, yeah,
something like that, is it? Yeah.
Oh, mate,
yeah. So 2-0 to Everton for me, but only after a more attacking lineup.
Wow. Well, I'll complete that. I won't be quite as positive as the other two chaps, but I'll say 2-1. So, given the circumstances that we've all gone for an Everton win, that's something, I guess. So either way, we'll be back to reflect upon that next week and what lies ahead for Everton and going into the international break. But I've been your host, Chris Beesley, been joined by Joe Thomas and Gavin Buckland. This has been the Royal Blue Podcast.